Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video we're looking at and putting together the code of plates for the Guillaume du Chasseler effigy. Last time I started making the gambeson, which I still have my monkeys working on quilting that, but now, since I was itching to get back to working with steel, I've made the coat of plates. So over the gambeson and the habergeon, and just peeking out from under the surcoat is a coat of plates. So since the majority is covered by a surcoat, I had to use some deductions to determine what kind of coat of plates it was exactly. And so after doing copious amounts of research and trolling my available resources several times over, I came to the conclusion that the coat of plates old Guillaume is wearing here is most similar to the one found in Ingolstadt, Germany. At least it's the most similar to the extant pieces found in that one. The length of it more or less corresponds with the way that the pieces were put together in the Wallace collection, which just barely extends beyond the hips, but terminates right around the cuisses, the top of the cuisses. Another telltale sign is the silhouette, which is pretty classic of the mid-14th century, is the narrow waist and the broad-ish kind of chest. It conforms to the male torso, which is kind of the entire male body really, and in my opinion complements it very well. It kind of follows the same fashion choices of clothing as well. So with the research mostly over, I started making the thing, and unfortunately, I don't really have a process of making the breastplate piece, but there's nothing fancy about the breastplate though, since it's a relatively shallow shape, and since I'm a small guy, I was able to dish the whole thing without any application of heat or welding. In complete honesty, I'm a little concerned about the thickness due to the dishing process rather than raising it, but I think that it's negligible since it's a pretty small piece considering just how tiny my rib cage is. And all I was using was a 3-pound hammer and my large dishing form. Unlike before, like when I was making the bassinet, I didn't put a whole lot of force into the hammer blows, whereas before I would pretty much really put all of my being into it. For this, I essentially just let the hammer fall and just moved the whole thing in a radial movement around the dishing form several times. I did several passes, and eventually I got to the depth that I wanted. Once I had the breastplate finished, I stuck it onto my mannequin, and I mutilated a couple poor defenseless cardboard boxes and drafted the patterns for the falds, abdominal plates, and most interestingly, the back plate. So here on the original, you can see that some of the plates are on the top of the back, almost on the shoulders, not quite. But the main problem with this is I wasn't able to tell, or I wasn't certain if it was just one single piece, like a small single piece breastplate that had fragmented at some point, or if it was originally a brigandine construction. And I really, really wanted to do a single piece breastplate, or backplate, excuse me. The problem being that the earliest extant backplates that I know of are these, and the very earliest of those being from 1380 or thereabouts, which is about 30 years after the effigy was supposedly built. In fact, I even had the backplate all cut out and shaped because I really wanted to make one. But as a compromise, I decided to cut down the original design to fit the profile design, which is kind of more of a V shape. I did, however, allow for the backplate to be modular, so since the placement of the plate itself prevents me from jamming my head through the head hole, I needed to put straps on the shoulders so that I can take that off and then buckle the straps again. This makes it possible to take off the entire back plate and then replace it with a brigandine type if I choose to. And so the buckles that are holding it on, as I see it, are a perfectly acceptable option for this sort of coat of plates, which is primarily for the functionality that I said before, which is making a very formally fitting fit to my back, and because I'm not able to put my head through it. Even on later breastplates, the only thing that's holding it to the wearer are some leather straps on the back. But otherwise, the whole thing operates a lot like a Visby style coat of plates. That is, some sort of flap that goes down the back, in this case the back plate, and 2 other flaps that close around the abdomen and kind of leave a hole for my arms and everything. So the folds were a bit of a tricky part, because you can see here that on the original, the plates are all too deteriorated to make out any kind of overlap that they have. but it would seem appropriate since the earlier style Visby coats of plates all seem to have some kind of overlap, as do nearly all Burgundian style armors, like the later kinds and, like I said before, the Visby styles. Um, Another item that might serve as proof of an overlap are the folds on later breastplates, which, although there's a whole lot more of them and they're smaller, they all overlap each other at the same, all the same. It's just uh, so that they compress into each other and everything and provide that freedom of movement. And you'll notice that here on the front there are four fold plates, but you'll flip it over to the back and you'll see that only three of them turn into an abdominal plate to cover the sides of the torso, but not quite the entire back. I suspect that there's only three folds turn into the abdominal plates is to allow more leg movement, but still cover more of the front. And at some point I had questioned myself that the effigy seems to depict a greater number of folds than the Ingolstadt find, but I went with the latter anyways because it appeared the closest out of what I could find, and I didn't really want to speculate too much. Because that's just getting into unknown territory and it's kind of dangerous as far as this sort of thing goes. So another thing I think you'll see in the Ingolstadt armor is that it has some sort of integrated shoulder defense, which is some kind of plate on the very top and on the joint itself. However, on the effigy, it doesn't show any obvious joint defense like in the Visby finds, which are just tiny little rondels essentially. Um, and it could be that the surcoat is covering it since it does kind of come down onto his arms a little bit. But I'm under the impression that it would show through like the plates. I mean, it's not necessarily the most detailed effigy, but that's my thinking. I can wear them if I choose to or not. They're pretty low profile, but I did definitely include the former shoulder defense on the tops of the shoulders, which are just kind of like little overlapping straps of steel covered in the canvas. And speaking of the canvas, I decided to use that as a foundation material rather than leather. And this is a little bit of conjecture on my part, I'll admit, since there are no coat of plates similar to this with any sort of covering, leather or otherwise. But I've made several Visby style coats of plates, and I've used canvas on all of them, and I've had pretty good success with that. And I know somebody who built his own Visby coat of plates, and he used leather, and it seems like that's working out just fine for him. So I chose to go with the canvas, but since it's woven, it'll tend to breathe easier, meaning that the fibers will allow the heat to escape around the plates without as much resistance as leather. Overall, I'm very pleased with this build. After wearing it in a bunch, it seems that it certainly works very smoothly. But if I were to do it again, I would probably tailor the canvas in a way so that there isn't as much wrinkling around the convex curves in the abdomen right underneath the breastplate, right where it meets the folds. After using it in some fights, the weight, which was just about twice what I was used to with the older coat of plates I used, was a bit of a shock, but after I got used to it, the protection and coverage it gave was much appreciated. So, thank you guys for watching. I really enjoyed building this coat of plates. I hope you learned something and enjoyed my theatrics.